Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. That was our intro music tonight was American composer Stephen Reich. That was For Organs Phase Patterns from 1970. Thank you. Hello, welcome. My name is Kevin Arrow. I am the exhibitions and project manager here at MOCA North Miami. Thank you for joining us tonight for Conversations at MOCA. Little by little, the funereal splendor of the ancient and icy mansion was being transformed. Tonight, we are again honored to host Raul De Nieves, whose exhibition Eternal Return and the Obsidian Heart, curated by Risa Puleo, is on view until March 21st. Joining Raul this evening is contemporary composer and artist Raven Chacon, based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Miami composer, musician, archivists Emile Milgram and T. Castillo of Archival Feedback, in a discussion about sound, music, performance, and their influences, moderated by Rob Goyanes. Before proceeding, MOCA acknowledges that we stand on the current and ancestral home of the Seminole tribe of Florida and the Miccosukee tribe of Indians of Florida. We further acknowledge the Calusa, Jaga, Maya-Imi, and Tequesta peoples, all historic caretakers of this land. We honor and thank them for their past, present, and future stewardship of Southern Florida. MOCA North Miami's exhibitions and programs are made possible with the generous support of the North Miami Mayor and Council and the City of North Miami and the Miami-Dade Department of Cultural Affairs. We also want to thank our Board of Trustees, our corporate and foundation partners, and our members. Conversations at MOCA is presented by the Green Family Foundation, and we want to extend a heartfelt thanks to all for your meaningful support. Now, I've got some introductions. First, Raul De Nieves is a multimedia artist, performer, and musician whose wide-ranging practice investigates notions of beauty and transformation. De Nieves' visual symbolism draws on both classical, Catholic, and Mexican vernacular motifs to create his unique mythology, which often challenges and explores themes of sexuality, the human body, and individual and public histories. Raven Chacon is a composer, performer, and installation artist from Fort Defiance, Navajo Nation. As a solo artist, collaborator, or with Post-Commodity, Chacon has exhibited or performed at the Whitney Biennial, Documenta 14, Red Cat, Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal, San Francisco Electronic Music Festival, to name but a few. As Archival Feedback, Emile Milgram and Tom Wheeler Castillo engage in various critical dialogues of the moment, approaching the environment as a studio in the field, accessing the landscape through the soundscape, and producing sound works in a wide variety of mediums. Moderator Rob Goyanes' writing has appeared in Art in America, Bomb, Jewish Currents, and elsewhere, and as a musician, he's released music on labels like Emost and Psychic Liberation. So without further ado, live from Brooklyn, New York, please welcome Raul De Nieves. From Albuquerque, New Mexico, I'm happy to welcome Raven Chacon. From Miami, Florida, please welcome Emile Milgram and T. Wheeler Castillo of Archival Feedback. And from somewhere in cyberspace, please welcome tonight's moderator, Rob Goyanes. Thank you all for joining us. I am going to douse my camera, hand it over to Rob, and I will come back towards the end to field questions from our audience on YouTube and here on Zoom. So thanks, guys. Have a good talk.
Appreciate it, Kevin. Thanks for the lovely introduction. Thanks to everyone for participating here in the panel and for everyone who's joining us in Zoom land, wherever you are. I guess I want to explain the structure of the talk a little bit before we get started. I'm going to share my screen currently, and we'll be looking at some work of the artists to start with, just to kind of familiarize anyone who doesn't know about how each artist works and their practice and whatnot. So I think first it'll be appropriate to start with Raul. Hey Raul, how you doing?
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. So I guess I wanted to start just with these figures here at your show at MOCA. Can you just tell us a little bit about them?
Well, these figures, especially here, are kind of around, based around this kind of iconic worship of my mother, and, you know, thinking about her different qualities in life that outshine the way that I see her. And for me, costume work has been really an essential part of my practice because it's allowed me to not only use found materials or create these new narratives with these costumes that then become these figures. They've allowed me to really embody them as musical instruments at points, and to really give them a life of an experience that people can become part of. So within this practice, it's really allowed for a two-way to see how something that is functional can be also thought of a moment in just like standfulness. So yeah, these costumes really just represent this beauty of how we can interact with one another and transform ourselves from different feelings.
Mm. That's interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about coming up in San Diego's punk scene and then in San Francisco's drag scene? I'm curious how like those sort of impacted your visual art practice.
Well, I always found that through these kind of scenes, musical scenes, there was such a way of how you would feel kind of represented. And obviously in San Diego, I really fell in love with the hardcore straight edge scene out of Shea Cafe. I felt that it was so powerful to just really kind of see these people create these small gatherings. One band really particular stood to me, or two of them. It was like the Locusts and the Beautiful Mutants, and they were both quite different. But they all kind of had this way of also dressing themselves that made me so interested in how a group of five people could really make you think about a different way of seeing a musician, portraying these characters that maybe embodied them through feel more angst, or to be able to really express themselves through these kind of ways of how the scene would work. In that manner, it kind of allowed me to start thinking about how we all present ourselves and kind of where we fall into like, ways of who we relate to and what we are interested in. Obviously, moving to San Francisco, it was a kind of a whole different experience, thinking of another way of how performers really also interacted with the idea of a musical way of seeing themselves. The drag scene or the queer artists really just were so exuberant in how they really created these personas of themselves that it really just ultimated my whole kind of way of how I started to see myself. And the freedom to fully express yourself through apparel really became so prominent in my practice, because I felt that really individualized yourself to maybe the deity that you kind of felt you could be, or the character that you'd wanted to embody. So most of my work really developed through this idea of finding performance and apparel as such a way to think about how to begin a practice, or how to create these new narratives that were brewing up in my mind.
I want to start playing this video by Hairbone, which is the band that you're in and you front. Let me turn down the volume a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about your intersection with the noise scene and sort of what the ideas behind Hairbone are?
Well, Hairbone has been a band for 10 years now, and we pretty much started by just wanting to make noise, and finding that this spontaneous way of performing really gave us also this kind of like specific sound that became part of our trajectory. And Haribo actually has really become such an influence in my practice, because I've seen how within a decade we've transformed ourselves from maybe not really understanding how to play music, but how to kind of create these live experiences that people would really become part of, and that we'd want to be part of. So meeting Nathan Whipple actually gave me such a freedom to really want to become a full realized musician, or to really relate to this idea of musicianship, through the act of writing music, or just listening to them and understanding how to actually create a structure to a song. But besides that, this band has really given me the opportunity to fully like express myself in different ways that I kind of didn't really understand, because I love the idea of having a collaborative practice with people, because it allows you to see how one can really become three minds, and how we, can connect. This video is a really amazing video by Jessie Stead, who is the drummer of the band, and she creates most of the imagery that the band is known for. She's an amazing audiovisual artist, and this video really proves of the narratives that we wanted to convey, which is this idea of like dropping dead on arrival at a Bank of America and having this cop romanticize like his scenario of like being that person that like confronts this experience. But you know, at the end of the day, it's like really a fun way of self-expression to, for us, you know, being three different artists coming into this musical practice allows us for just to be extremely experimental and really just let go and kind of have fun, you know, like band practice becomes like a cathartic experience of where like we need to like let go of the things that are like in our head. So creating this music is just like a form of freedom that, you know, I feel like it's one of the most powerful tools that actually music can do, is allow you to let go of emotions and put them out in for people to kind of experience.
I'm curious, why Bank of America?
I think at this moment it was just a pun, you know, like we were just kind of trying to be pun people.
Right.
So the Bank of America was not really a specific reason, other than the fact that this Bank of America is like a small ATM that was really easy to film at. So it, because you know you kind of can't film at banks, so
Right.
it actually was like the best prop to have to actually realize kind of this full narrative. So the bank really became kind of maybe like the script.
Right. Yeah, I think it revolved around that spot because you were able to do it there.
Yeah.
Huh. So I think we'll move on to Tom and Emily now. I want to talk about a couple works of yours. I think we'll start with this one from your submission to with Future Cities. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
So can you just tell us about a little bit about this work? It's a field recording, right?
Yeah, there's this organization called Cities in Memory, and they put out a call to artists to submit field recordings of the city they're in. And then they were going to have other artists reinterpret them. So this was our submission from Miami. This is a hydrophone recording we took in Museum Park outside the Perez Art Museum. We do a lot of these types of underwater recordings all throughout South Florida, and Museum Park is one of the spots we've done quite a few at. There's always some really interesting stuff going on there because you have a lot of different types of boats passing by. You have a highway really nearby. You have the museum there, so it's usually pretty rich with sound, especially underwater.
So this is in Biscayne Bay.
Mm-hmm.
What we're hearing now.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
It's facing Government Cut, right where the cruise ships all leave. This was a recording that is from our archive, but we didn't, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't record it for this project. It was just something really, really cool that happened to us in our practice of constantly recording and constantly being out in the world or in the studio, as we put it. And it was just this beautiful, bizarre moment where these frequencies were coming in, and you could hear the music that was being played through the water. I remember the day clearly.
So why Museum Park? Why that site in particular?
There's a lot of easy access to Biscayne Bay. There's kind of a now pseudo notorious photo of me dangling over the side, looking like I'm about to fall in, just kind of trying to get the hydrophone in there. And there's just some good spots to really get in there and pick up some sounds. So we go there a lot. We've experimented there a lot.
It's an important public space. It's 22 acres that gives the city of Miami access to the waterways. And to me, you know, and Emily, of course, these spots are part of our lives, and but they're also really about seeing or hearing Miami in a particular way. So we're constantly going back to Biscayne Bay and recording at different sites. So if you sort of play a lot of our work over each other, it's essentially mapping out the bay. The bay's kind of like our Nile, our river, or our body of water.
That's funny. Yeah, it is like our Nile down here. How did the two of you, or I guess, why did the two of you sort of start Archival Feedback? What was the genesis of it?
We both moved back to Miami around the same time. We had both also moved to Portland at slightly different times. So we have that similar trajectory of coming back to this place where we grew up, and we knew each other growing up as well. And we're just spending a lot of time hanging out, and started this dialogue about sound and this place and the landscape, and just started sort of making these field recordings and exploring our home in this new way together. And it's just turned into a lot of different projects and collaborations throughout that.
Let's talk about a call to bird. That's kind of loud. Hold up. That bird is loud.
It's a very different waveform. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, where's the volume here? Looks like it's not up here. Well, can you tell us a little bit about the call to bird? It's obviously, bird sounds, but let me pause it so that people can hear you.
If I remember correctly, we were actually working with a visual artist who did the artwork. It was kind of, Archival Feedback is a dialogue. It's always collaborative. We always bring other people in, as well as it being a dialogue between Emily and I. Birding is just something that we jokingly call ourselves in a way, because that's what you're constantly recording out in the field. It's but also where we live in Miami, it's a bird sanctuary, so you just kind of develop a certain ear, and so birding is a subject. Birding is thinking about the history of the state, and in this particular project, it's a dialogue between two birds. One bird's extinct, and we're using a recording from another field recordist, and we wanted it to be a dialogue between another species that was also in the news because it was going extinct. So it turned into a moment for us to play, create this environment, this fictional environment where they can communicate, and then also we get to explore the sound in a playful way.
I want to move now to this piece, which I find really interesting. Greater Miami, 1934. See the volume on this, kind of loud too. I don't know why there isn't a volume tab here, but I'll play it for a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit about what this piece is?
That's part of multiple pieces that were in a project that Kevin had actually invited us to do for History Miami. And we ended up taking and manipulating field recordings and other materials and pressing them into polycarbonate, or using a lathe cut and getting them into a polycarbonate disc, so they're actually playable discs. And then we created different artwork on the backside of each one. This particular one is a map of Miami from 1934, and we played the map using an application called phonopaper. So it basically reacts to light and markings. So that was our way of interpreting the map through sound.
Interesting. So I want to think more about that sort of like the topography of sound, or how Miami, what typifies the sort of sonic environment of Miami for the two of you?
At least for me, I've been spending a lot of time, or have spent a lot of time, trying to tune out some of the things that have been far too present growing up here. So sounds like traffic, trying to forget that those things are there and hone in more on birds is a big one, as Tom mentioned. There are so many birds, and I live in a neighborhood where there's everything from hummingbirds to bluebirds to cardinals, and it's just been really interesting learning about those sounds, and trying to eschew some of the other ones that I find more annoying.
Yeah, so for me, archival feedback's also a space for me to understand my own senses, and listening intently, or also trying to understand the world through other senses is just something I'm really happy to constantly explore with Emily, and using technology to answer, almost alchemic questions. And so this sort of topography goes underwater, it's just beyond, but while also in a way embracing some of the urban too. I do like quiet, and I do like going to places where there isn't the urban, but the urban, we live in it, and it's kind of a mantra for me at this point. So it's texture, and as we can use it. We've used it successfully, I think, with this way of sort of mapping and sensing Miami, sensing the different landscapes.
And there are like urban incidentals, I suppose, the things that aren't the obvious urban sounds, but they happen just like because of construction. Sometimes there are structures that are incomplete, and they're sitting there in such a way that they're creating a really cool whistle or hum because of wind or because other things going on, and that can be really beautiful. So
yeah, it's still to this day my favorite track that we've put out in the world as archival feedback is there's this platform in downtown Miami where when the wind hits a certain miles per hour, there is this whistle that comes through the railing of the mover stop. And Emily and I nearly lost our lives trying to record it, because it's clearly dangerous to be on that platform when the wind's blowing that hard and it's a storm. But it's still like, you heard music in the urban space, and it's kind of the perfect offering from us to the world, or to the sonicscape, to record that and document that and make it musical.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. So I guess we'll move on now to Raven. I'm going to play maybe just the introduction, or just the first couple minutes of a song often played on the radio. Then we can talk about it.
Estimado virrey de la Nueva España, I'm searching, buscando como loco, searching for a small but handsome hoard of gold. Monedas, dólares, dolores, stuff that originated from Cibola, the 7 cities of gold. I have found lots of uranium. some gold, and I know the precise location of the treasure from some books I read last week in the Santa Fe Public Library. Si bola, si vuela, de volar con mota. Estoy alucinando, alucinógeno.
So Raven, you directed this film. Can you tell us how it kind of came to be? And I know it's a collaboration with Cristobal. What is the film? What is the basis for the film?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, this is probably one of my least sound works, even though there is a lot of sound in the soundtrack, and a lot of the film is based around the form of the song that ends up in the middle of the film. But no, yeah, this was supposed to be a post-commodity piece, I think. And but Cristobal and I, both being from New Mexico, and myself being half Chicano, half Navajo, and Cristobal being Chicano Hispano from northern New Mexico, wanted to speak about that history of colonization in the northern part of New Mexico, and speaking about this mixture and this responsibility of having to steward the land, even though you were a product of that mixture. And what the legend was back when the conquistadors came through here was they were looking for these cities of gold. Probably a legend that happened all over the Americas, really. I'm sure this was in Florida too. But what is happening in this film? It's out of time. This thief, I guess, this conquistador, who's played by Guillermo Gomez Pena, our hero, who we were wanting to collaborate. That's really how this came about, was just wanting to do a piece with Guillermo. He can't find the gold, so he's looking for uranium. He's looking for the materials of the Manhattan Project, which was also developed in northern New Mexico. So we started by trying to make some kind of script out of dichos, out of all these different sayings, that are all over Latin America, trying to find some that were particular to northern New Mexico, and just start there as that being the dialogue in this search. And so yeah, this isn't really a sound work, but there is a soundtrack on there, and it's like 20 minutes short. It's been showing in film festivals, and also an exhibition called Soundings, which is a sound art and score exhibition that's traveling. So this is kind of came about, I'd say, kind of backwards. It actually originated as a score, as a song, but then developed in its form into this script.
So yeah, maybe we can look at a piece that is way more about your sound work. So this is from an opera called Sweetland. I'll go ahead and play. We can talk about it as it's playing, I suppose. Can you tell us a little bit about this project?
Yeah. Do you have the Zoom where you can do the direct audio, where it actually does?
I'm not sure. What do you mean direct audio?
That's okay. We can let it play.
What have you done? Yesterday's over. It's our future. Why can't I stand? This is good, authentic shit. Like revenge stars. An appetite can get some spurs. Look what outgrows the spirit. If I could find grandfather, I'd ask how night, a boat without oars. If I could find my father, I'd ask how to shut a house without doors. If I could find my brother, I'd ask how to beat the ocean from shore. I was a seer, I knew the future. Leave you, honey, you've got nothing to fear. I vow to hold you here forever. In our sweet, sweet I was a seer, I knew the future, but I didn't see our erasure.
We could stop it there and kind of discuss a little bit.
Yeah. So this was a project I worked on for about 3 years, and it's an opera called Sweetland that I co-composed with a composer named Du Yun, who was based out of New York City. And this was presented by this opera director Yuval Sharon, who puts on these very ambitious operas in Los Angeles. And so this idea started that he had received an invitation, being that last year was the 400-year anniversary of Plymouth Rock. Somebody had asked him if he would do a opera about the first Thanksgiving. And he approached me, and I was like, hell no, I don't want anything to do with that. You know, I was imagining the worst construction paper, pilgrim hats or something. But I'd never written an opera before. I'd written for voice. I guess I should explain a little bit about my practice. A lot of it is noise, improvisation, building instruments. A lot of it is sound installations and recordings. But my formal training is composing, notes on paper. And so this was an opportunity to combine all of that, the noise, the electronics, treating the stage like a sound installation, and then of course writing for these singers and orchestras. And so what we ended up doing is not doing an opera about the first Thanksgiving. It actually turned into something very complex and huge. We made 2 operas about Manifest Destiny, not any kind of historical opera, but about the myths around, the things we were taught in elementary school, that there was this Thanksgiving, or that the railroad had peacefully made its way across the country being built. And so really there's 2 parallel operas. Depending what ticket you bought, you saw one or the other. Sometimes they overlapped and intersected each other. And so this is an excerpt from the story that ended up being that kind of forced marriage / feast first Thanksgiving.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process of composition, how you approach it, the opera in particular, and how was it purely from like a classical scoring way, or did you kind of introduce other elements to the compositional element of it?
It was totally scored, 100%. Probably my most normal looking score, because it had to, sync up. It had to line up to different things. But so the other, this opera, this half of the opera was called Feast. The other was called Train. And the way that the form shook out was that there's an introduction that everybody attends, a scene. There's actually a stage that everybody goes to and sees the first act. And Du Yun and I composed that together. And then she went off and composed the first part of Feast, and I composed the first part of Train. After an intermission, the audience goes back to their respective stages, and they see that I wrote the sequel to Feast and she wrote the sequel to Train. and then everybody meets back at the end. So on a large form, there was this kind of collaborative composition where we're referencing each other's music, we're sharing instruments, and the characters remain the same, but you're kind of seeing the alternate universe of maybe what really happened in that second time.
It's funny that you mentioned that this was your most sort of standard scoring process. I'm curious about American Ledger number 2, because that seems to me, let's take a look at the score here. Let's see, web is a little, there we go. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's the score for the piece, is that right?
That's the score, and these American Ledger series are this these pieces that I've been making to reference American history. So this was something I was working on, parallel to working on Sweetland. And back to that Soundings exhibition, actually, the first one was commissioned for them for that show. But all of them, the scores aren't available on paper. They exist as billboards, newspapers, flags, walls, doors. One of them is railroad tracks. And they all replicate a flag. So this one replicates the state flag of the state of Oklahoma. And it was presented as a billboard in the district where the Tulsa massacre happened in 1921, where they were burning down Black Wall Street. So we were able to perform this in that location. And what the score references through all of its elements is this process and this system of equity that the performers have to engage in. And it's kind of this reciprocity that doesn't make sense. I mean, they're handing instruments to each other, but at the same time, they have to perform to get out of the situation. So the more they perform, the more they're active, then they are being forced out of the composition. So it's referencing forced migrations into the state of Oklahoma, into Tulsa, the tribes that were forced to live in that area that aren't indigenous to there, also forcing out the indigenous tribes that were in Oklahoma, and also this Tulsa massacre, driving out the successful Black population in that community.
It's interesting to me that both you and Raul have worked in opera. And so I want to come back to this opera question a little bit and play something from Raul, your work with Colin Self. This is from The Fool. Could you tell us a little bit about this work, Raul?
Well, The Fool was it was also one of the first times I've kind of had this great idea of bringing a lot of the things that I was seeing or doing, whether it be the costumes, the sets, but mainly also just continuing to work with the larger people. And with Colin, since we had such a great relationship of, meeting each other through the noise scene, he comes from a very musical aspect too. So through his guidance, we were able to create The Fool, which it all started just based around the idea that we kind of both had the same dream. And when we were telling each other this dream, it became something that we wanted to create a reality, which was pretty much the narrative that ends up happening in The Fool. And, for us, the realization of creating such a large scale work was a really great experience that allowed us to be able to foresee that we were able to make this kind of work. I got a residency at Issue Project Room for a year. So for a full year, we were rehearsing voice, composition, movement, and it ended up turning into The Fool. But opera to me has always been such a great way to understand like large scale work, specifically through like the avant-garde and just seeing how they use the word opera to kind of just really dive deeper into maybe making a full narrative experience. I worked with Robert Ashley for 3 years and Alex Waterman on one of Bob's pieces for the Whitney Biennial. And I also got to learn so much from Robert Ashley and Waterman, seeing how the way that the text would become such a great example of how to make a score just through notations. So it kind of just really has been through all of like an aspect of giving yourself the opportunity to dive deeper into that world. I do really would love to kind of have more of an experience in that in my later life, because I feel like it does require a lot of focus and derivative way of wanting to make something so large scale happen. So I really hope that that's something that is in the future for me again.
Yeah, Raven, do you have any other thoughts on the format of the opera and sort of what it enables that maybe other musical traditions don't offer?
Well, it's highly collaborative. I mean, there was an opportunity for us to work with projectionists, people who were designing stages, costuming, and I was able to bring in my friend Chanupa Hanska-Luger to help co-direct with Yuval, and he thinks of this as like an installation also. So we were, it was almost like a super installation, or a durational installation that we were able to kind of work with, as another kind of format. And yeah, the narrative is important too. The ability to use it as a vehicle for narrative is something that you can't always do with music, or you don't have to do with other kinds of music. It doesn't have to be about anything.
Right. Yeah. So now I want to start posing questions to the group. Sort of whoever wants to jump in at any point, So you all come from DIY underground sort of scenes. So I'm curious, what draws you to those spaces and those types of people?
I was asked this question recently in another interview, and the thing that I really love about underground DIY spaces is I've always felt that there's very little judgment in them, and it's a great place to experiment and try things out and see what works for you, what doesn't. I've done so many crazy things at noise conferences and noise shows and all these spaces that I never thought I would do. I always sort of, up until I got into these scenes, I've always played music a little more traditionally. I always played in rock-esque bands. And then when I started getting into the experimental scene, I was just building my own instruments and singing and screaming and doing all these things I never thought I was capable of. And it just feels great every time. It's always just an amazing, empowering feeling to be in these spaces.
Yeah, for me, it always felt like that secret library that you couldn't find until you actually looked for it hard enough to also be allowed in, because I think in a way you really have to be looking for these kind of experiences in these people. And I remember in San Diego, like it would be such an amazing way to come close to like people really realizing things that institutions probably wouldn't let them do, or just the adventure of going into a sewer and having people bring generators and create this like really surreal concert that you would only kind of like dream of through like literature or something, but actually really becoming reality. I felt that was one of the most amazing things, to just see these people really create their ultimate visions in situations that are not necessarily supposed to be housing that kind of experience. So in a way, the underground culture really just kicks ass. It's like the best.
Yeah, I mean, my participation or intro into that kind of thing was it's it's just a giant feedback loop. I mean, it probably was that I was hosting a show for somebody, or that I needed a show in a different city, and then one of us reciprocated, and then it never ended. I mean, I booked a show for them, and then they booked a show for me or their friend, and it just kept going for 20 years up until COVID stopped it all. Or with labels, I might have put somebody's thing out and then they put out a tape of mine. So it was just never ending. And it's fun. And like I said before, it's a place for experimentation. And here in Albuquerque, I mean, the cost of renting is very cheap. So it was often that we would rent a studio to work out of, and then, a studio space. And then that also became a venue.
Yeah, my studios have mainly always been in these venue spaces where I get to kind of live with musicians. So it actually was just such a natural way of me creating, and allowing myself to really see the full potential of how far you can push an idea when you have collaborators or people that are willing to experiment with you.
I'm curious too about sort of the limits of DIY and the underground scene. I've been thinking a lot about Mark Fisher's idea of care without community, and sort of getting past that sort of subcultural association, while of course maintaining protection for marginalized people and providing space for people who need it. What do you all think about sort of how can we evolve DIY underground culture and maybe either scale it up or change it in a way that can kind of broaden its sort of engagement with people? Or do you think that's maybe not something that should happen?
I feel like the cities that I've always lived in have been they have this kind of institution, which is the underground, that really, in a way, is maybe sometimes more desirable than what you kind of would go see at a normal theater, And I think it just goes back to kind of that idea of wanting to be a part of something that is something you have to seek for. But I think, in a way, I feel like living in New York really allows for a lot of underground culture to really be presented as a hierarchy, actually. And in a way, it's very like coveted, and very also respected. So I feel like for me, always wanting to kind of associate with that term of DIY culture and underground, because I think it only just makes me a little bit more in tune with my surroundings, and realizing that underground culture really is a huge mecca of like intellectuality. You'll get to really be around so many people that have such a large library of understanding art in a different form, that they have to create this kind of space.
I think maybe I'm just unaware of what the idea that you were referring to, Rob. But I've always found that these spaces where there is this experimentation, they are open to everyone. You just have to show up. And that's what I appreciate about it. It's really easy to sort of immediately make connections, and perhaps even encourage other people who wouldn't to be creative. And that in itself is, a really important space being provided for these ideas, sure, there are limitations, but there's potential. There's so much potential.
I guess too, like, in terms of the differences between the underground and the institution, maybe, what is everyone's experience in terms of working with institutions and kind of bringing that ethos and working with, bureaucratic organizations, very hierarchical sort of organizations, what translates there?
I've been very fortunate that, the musical projects that I've been a part of are allowed to kind of perform at the MoMA or, you know, other institutions. I mean, the only thing that I've been told was like, please don't get paint on the painting. But besides that, it's almost like, you know, they want to kind of experience this raw culture back into their museums, you know, and to have different people experience maybe this idea of the underground being elevated. But I find that, you know, a lot of my most crazy projects have been maybe realized in that setting, because you're either playing for people, patrons, or just museum goers. And you know, I remember doing this amazing performance by Xavier Cha at the Whitney for like 3 months, where I would just scream and like go into despair for 30 minutes. And maybe that was something I would do in the club or like, you know, in the basement. But now that it was actually presented at like 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, it was like way more like avant-garde, I think. And it felt so much more crazier, because I was like maybe in a way trying to channel this raw energy that I already had. But now it's like, you know, the child and his mother would attain this performance, and it kind of felt way more cathartic in a way, you know, to be able to perform for people that didn't experience this on a everyday level.
Right. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Well, on your first question, I was taking that like maybe how much can they overlap in their structure or in their models, and I mean, of course, I think they're very different. But what's exciting is that these DIY, let's say, venues, they're not supposed to last forever, like a museum or some kind of institution. It's nice that they might only exist for a few months, and then somebody else takes it over. Some younger, you know, folks go and do their thing, and it's always rotating and you know, moving around, and it's fluid and slippery.
Right. Yeah. I want to talk about the past year. You know, obviously things have changed, and I've talked to a lot of musicians and sound artists who have talked about. I've heard about two extremes in their sort of production. Either it's like slowed to a trickle or nothing, or they've been doing so much work. I'm curious about your personal kind of production over the past year and how things have impacted that process.
Oh, well, I quit drinking. I mean, you can't go out anymore. So yeah, I'm getting a ton of things done. Probably the most prolific I've been.
I mean, for me, yeah, collaborating has been, like, musically has been hard. But I find myself, you know, I don't know, maybe like experimenting by myself more, or kind of being more spontaneous at a gathering and be like, everyone, I'm gonna do a performance, and people are like, not again. But it's like, I don't know. Yeah, it's a little bit sad to not have this kind of energy that we were so used to. Personally, you know, go to a show every Friday or just be around more musicians every time. And I miss it.
Very early on during the pandemic, you know, part of Archival Feedback's, some of the ideas that we work with is about collaborating with others. And we put out an EP during the summer that was made entirely during the beginning of lockdown. And it was an invitation and a distraction for other artists to take the idea and do what they want with it. And I'm very proud of that release, because it seemed to, you know, giving someone a purpose, having a call, and you know, a distraction to respond. You know, I think all the artists that worked on it were appreciated just being asked, and that in itself is its own motivation. So we were able to still continue doing the work that we do despite these limitations.
This is the album. Is that right? Did I get the right one?
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah.
referring to. Yeah, nice. I'm interested in sort of how everyone's relationship to music has changed over the course of their lives. Maybe reflecting upon formative moments where music was, sort of recognized as this very integral force, maybe just memories or, just realizations where it was, music became that thing, for you.
I think that one of my earliest and kind of most continually salient memories is dancing to Janet Jackson songs in my living room when I was like 7, 8 years old. I reflect on it often because I can really still channel that feeling and how good it felt to just dance and experience that. And I just revisit that feeling when I'm not feeling so great. And anytime I hear that music, it brings me back to that place. And I know it sounds so cheesy, but it was just like so innocent and so great. And I feel like that's when I really opened up to the way music and sound made me feel. And it's kind of transcendent, and it follows me around to this day. Like I just constantly want to listen to things and experience things through that sense, be it music, be it nature and the landscape. Yeah, it's just constant. My day job is also music related. I run a record store, so I have to do music for work, and I definitely have like a demarcation between stuff I'm doing for work, and then I have like the playlist for like the stuff I want to enjoy that has nothing to do with work. And I try and make sure I visit that as often as possible. Like I set time aside daily to visit all of those things.
Yeah, I think definitely music for me always kind of created a relationship with the specific idea or moment. And it's been really interesting to see how through learning about music and becoming friends with musicians, how much you have that respect continues to grow. And, to meet your favorite musician is still this fan forward way of thinking. And I love appreciating the beauty that people bring to this world. And for me, music is a daily routine, like I tend to listen to so much different types of music. But it always just makes me feel very connected to the place where I'm at. So I think I'm still very keeping that same relationship, and that also music is such a like gateway to knowledge in a way.
Definitely. It's interesting, the gateway to knowledge idea, thinking about music's sort of transference into visual practice. Do you find that happening as well, like borrowing from music to kind of inform your visual work?
I think so, yeah, for sure. I mean, even just thinking about like, you know, um, aesthetics but definitely, I find myself now listening to so much like DJ culture music or techno that it really, I don't know, it motivates. I like listen to it all day. And so I'm like constantly pumping through like my run or, my art practice or trying to still listen to techno with my friends. And they're like, can we listen to something more chill? But I don't know. I think it's such a like interesting way that you're like, when you're listening to a lot of classical music, the way that maybe you portray yourself during those times, it's so different.
Listening is so emotional. It's such an emotional act. And I'm constantly trying to, with music and with sound, it's a way to sort of participate in popular culture while also it being completely internal, private thing. And so I appreciate it. And I think a lot of my visual work is coming from some of those questions that I have that we explore in archival feedback. which it is about the visual or the senses, and synesthesia. This, just sort of like this confusion of all these ways of understanding the world, the landscape. So it's all these things that we're saying. It's both emotional and tied to memory, but it's also tied to intellectual curiosity. That's what I love about it, and why, I can be terribly introverted, but I'll still try to make it out in non-COVID times, out to hear something raw, something live, and connect with that.
So I'm playing this piece now, Midnight Quinceañera by Deaf Convention Singers, which Raven was a part of, or maybe you were like the leader on it. But I love this because correct me if I'm wrong, but you sent an email out to people telling them to invite people to a location, and everyone would play an instrument sort of in this anonymous sort of way. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project?
Yeah. This is a group I formed around 2004. And I think there's probably like 30 people in this group. It's a ton of musicians based here in Albuquerque. Basically, we just kind of recruited people who would come to, these DIY spaces or come to noise shows here. And this was a piece I wanted to do where, kind of composing a situation. And exactly as you were saying, Rob, I sent an email to 4 of the core members of the group and said, send this kind of chain email to other friends. And here's an address, show up at midnight. There's not any electricity in this abandoned building. It's pitch black, bring an instrument, don't talk. And I would show up ahead of time with set up mics, portable recording.
Exactly as you were saying, Rob, I sent an email to 4 of the core members of the group and said, send this email, this kind of chain email to
somebody have their YouTube on. That's Kevin. Anyway, I would so I'd set up mics ahead of time. And
I thought we were making a sound piece now.
Feedback. Anyway, I'd set up mics ahead of time and we would play all night, and I don't know who's on the recording. So we put out, this is an album called Brujas that is all of the sessions.
Yeah, I feel like it really speaks to that sort of emotional bond that music can create amongst absolute strangers. That's the feeling of going to a show. It's just that energy that runs through a room. Excited to get back to that eventually.
Mm-hmm. I remember being like part of a Pauline Oliveros like call to rock piece where she invites everyone to bring a pebble and create her score. And it was, meeting her was one thing, but then seeing all these people bring like this rock and perform this piece, it was just so amazing that it was all these strangers. So that's really cool about this piece that you made.
I'd like to maybe shift a little bit. Raul, you mentioned that you were interested in frogs recently.
Oh yes, I'm kind of obsessed with frogs. I feel like I always get kind of like very interested in like animals that maybe tell of a time. And obviously the frog is such a beautiful creature that brings prosperity into its like symbolism and the idea of readapting to something. So they kind of, I think they're really a token of the way that I'm feeling it right now. And it's like, all I see is like frogs everywhere. Not literally, but that's kind of what I envision, like everyone going from land to sea, or and building that kind of like core group of people to be in your frog quarantine group. Karabbit. I don't know, I'm crazy.
No, not at all. I love it because everyone here has their practices sort of intersect with animals in some way. Like obviously with the occult to bird or birds, like with you that you two Archival Feedback did, and Raven, I know you like made instruments with animal skins and stuff. So I guess I'm wondering about like sort of that space, or it's just this idea of the non-human animal world and sound, and sort of how do you think about that, and just maybe what's been interesting to you lately in terms of that.
I was just gonna say, you know, I loved hearing the bird sounds earlier, and that's something that always, I guess, maybe ends up in a lot of my pieces too, is this kind of back and forth of trying to replicate those sounds or capturing those sounds and reusing them or processing them, and it's kind of it's complete. It's a feedback loop. It's
Feedback.
giving and then taking and giving back, and you know, seeing what the sonic result of that is.
Yeah.
We have actually a story about recording frogs out in the Everglades.
Oh wow.
At Paoki, is that right, Emily?
Yeah, Paoki.
And we were out there. We're working with another artist who was in residency in the Everglades at the time, and we were out in the middle of the night, and we were pretty much in the middle of this chorus of thousands of frogs, and we went out with our equipment to record, and it's still one of my most favorite moments in Archival Feedback's memory.
It was almost a little scary because you could not see anything, and just the headlamps and all the stuff we had were practically useless at that point because it was so dark, and the sound was beyond three-dimensional.
Wow.
It was just like engrossing. You didn't know what was coming from where, and the orientation was just so off. And listening back to it, I keep thinking about the sounds the creatures make in that show Stranger Things. It's like it sounds like 4,000 of those all at the same time, but with a ton of reverb and delay on it. It's a really, really crazy recording. It was, yeah, definitely something that I won't forget doing, and I have the sound just embedded in my brain.
Wow, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
It'll turn up in some form in we're actually doing sound design and score for feature narrative documentary with the same artist, Sasha Wartzel, and those sounds will turn up there for sure.
It's its own track.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a funny animal story. I was walking in this neighborhood in Miami last week, and I passed by this house, and there's a garbage truck backing up, and it was making that, you know, truck backing up noise. And I was like, wow, that's loud. It's like kind of early in the morning, you know. So I make my loop, and I come back around to that house, and I hear this bird kind of making this like the water drop sound that someone makes when they hit their cheek, you know. And I was like, oh wow, that's beautiful. This parrot can do this. So I stood there and I started recording it, and then it did a bark like the dog in the yard, and then it did the exact sound as the truck backing up, like a perfect mimicry of it. It was just incredible, you know. That's it.
Yeah, the truck backing up sound is an all-time favorite of ours. We've learned how to successfully EQ it out of a lot of recordings because it follows us everywhere. So yeah.
No, that's so funny that you bring this up, because I think when we were first doing the email, you asked to send some inspiration, and I sent that John Cage Waterworks, where he records and he's timed with like the water dropping, and it's like during the 60s and everyone's laughing, and I was like, that's such an amazing video or reference to maybe this conversation, and how noise is created, or the idea of composing through things that we're familiar with.
Definitely.
Okay, I love this so much.
Yeah.
Queuing it up here. Just get a background, you know. I know we're getting kind of close to time. I don't know if there are any questions that have been posed by any of our lovely audience members.
People are saying that we should be raving. Maybe not with people, but like raving in our heads.
I'm raving.
I'm raving away.
Naomi.
No, it's so funny because I haven't seen Naomi in so long, and we used to be like, before COVID, we'd be like, not another rave, you know, and we're like, wow, what the rave? When are we go to a rave?
Yeah, I do miss a rave. A good rave is.
See how fun? He's crazy. I love it.
Gotta bust this out at the rave.
Put this at the rave. Everyone's gonna poop their pants.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't see any. Do we have any questions? Is Kevin?
I think there were some in the chat that Kevin was kind of gathering. I saw some come through as we were talking.
We're too underground, you guys.
Yeah. I'm happy to report that my battery died during this conversation and I got booted off. I scrambled, I'm back online, but the questions that I had in the chat feed vanished when I logged back on. But Dave Rodriguez had a great question regarding archival feedback process, but I don't have the specifics of the question.
I see it here. It says, curious to hear how, if you frame your work with archival feedback within the traditional archival impulses related to, quote, preservation. Your soundscapes and sonic maps seem to both capture the specific qualities of a given space and time and are also steeped in ecological concerns related to preserving an increasingly threatened Miami. Do you view AF as a part of any kind of preservation efforts? Wow. That's a good question. Yes, and I think I can briefly talk on this. I think Tom could probably answer it better, but at the initial start of archival feedback, part of what we've wanted to do or have been aiming to do is create an actual sound archive, sound library of field recordings that we've taken, but also that other people have taken of this place and of this landscape, and kind of have it be open source Creative Commons thing that people can listen to the sounds, use the sounds, manipulate the sounds, continue to add to the archive. That's, you know, it's taken on maybe some different forms, just as the project has taken on different forms, but in that form, it's not totally off the table. And I see that as sort of a form of preservation.
I also think that there is some critique of the archive or of these ideas of preservation. We work within them, we source from them, and we try to redefine what an archive is by being open in this idea of creating a library that's available to anybody. But we're also, you know, we're thinking about, you know, it doesn't matter what to preserve if we kind of lose it all, right? So the message in the work is also bringing awareness, and you know, it is ultimately a cry to pay attention to issues regarding climate change and how it affects cities like Miami, and you know, sort of just thinking about that larger existential angst. Being in Miami and reacting to Miami, you know, on a daily basis. It's, you know, in a lot of ways, people, the leaders of the city, their heads are still in the sand. They're preparing for the unknown, but they're also, I've just never seen this much construction. It just seems like the work needs to continue because the message hasn't been received. So I think it is a critique of the archive too.
There is a question. I'd like to propose a question from Stephanie Berzon in the audience, who's asking, do you have an important or favorite natural sound memory so far in quarantine? And are cities renaturing? Anyone can jump on that.
Before quarantine, I didn't know that a hummingbird made a sound. I always just saw it as some fantastical creature that was, I don't know, like too fast for sound. And I finally heard a hummingbird sound about 2 months ago. And then we got a hummingbird feeder because I want the hummingbird to come back and I want to hear more hummingbird sounds and record more hummingbird sounds. So that's, a new thing I discovered.
What is the sound that it makes?
It's just like a high-pitched tweet. It's not like a fancy thing like a cardinal or something, but I just thought for whatever reason that they just didn't make sounds because they were too busy being fast and awesome. I don't know.
They can also see colors that we can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I live by the subway, so I'm like really kind of now like so used to, I mean, I think I've always been, but maybe now more, living by the subway for like almost 2 years. It's like such a comforting feeling somehow, and I miss it at like 3 a.m. because the subway doesn't run. The squeak.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when noise pollution, but when I first heard the term noise pollution and light pollution, like you don't see the sky when you're in Miami unless you go deep into the Everglades. And it's interesting to hear how quiet it is now. Maybe it's a COVID thing or just where you can be. It's interesting to experience the sounds of nothing, which is rare.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you feel that sounds and music can sort of provide healing. Like I feel like maybe with Raul it's self-healing, and perhaps with Raven can sound sort of purify a place, and with archival feedback can sound or capturing sound or playing sound sort of do environmental healing. Do you think about these things at all in your individual work?
Yeah. I mean, surely people have been finding ways that sound can bless a space, and maybe serve as the frame for some kind of ceremony or some kind of duration. Earlier in this talk, we were talking about just these other kinds of spaces where we gather because of music, and obviously those are places that can heal from sound. But yeah, that's not anything I know about. I think there's overt works we can make that can reference a place and maybe bring attention to something that's happening in a place also. So in that way it can at least maybe inform or bring attention to a place or a topic or issue around that place.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Yeah, I was one of the things I had in my notes here was about the weaponization of sound. I think it's interesting how, pretty much any sound can have a sort of multivalent use if it's used in the right or wrong way. It can be torture or it can be healing. So I don't know if there's like a natural sort of way of using sound to do any of these things, but it's probably very dependent on context and, various other things, but.
Yeah, they say that there are frequencies or specific frequency. I always forget what the hertz is. It's like in, I don't know, like 400 something range, maybe. That's called like the healing frequency. And there's been experimentation or people tuning music and tuning songs like to this frequency, and it's supposed to provide a sense of calmness and relaxation and actually heal. I haven't looked super into it, but I've heard people talk about that and talk about how it's a tool some people could use to make any music be pleasant to anyone. And then I would assume that the opposite of that is you could also tune to frequencies that drive people crazy or make people feel terrible. I mean, definitely when we record stuff underwater, there's creatures underwater. And if our hydrophones are picking up a boat blasting Van Halen or whatever, what does that sound like and feel like to a manatee? I don't know. So, that's something I think Tom and I have talked about a lot. Like, what's it like for the creatures in the water hearing all of these sounds, the sounds of the boats, the sounds of the music blasting, the sounds of the highway, those vibrations. Sound travels different in water than it does in air. That's a constant thing we talk about.
And on the other side of this is also the more we focus on sound or working with this medium, it becomes also a very direct way of listening and becoming aware of listening. So it's I learned to be quiet more because I'm trying to listen more. And I think that as a meditation, or at least at the center of the work, not to be too loud, not to always, be the human present in the space, and to tread lightly and tread with sensitive ears to be aware and to come to these realizations. And that's at the heart of the work too.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, does anyone have any closing remarks? I think we've answered all of the questions in the feed. Rob, can I ask you to expound slightly on the title of this evening's talk?
There's not really much to say. I was flipping through 100 Years of Solitude, and it's just a quote by Marquez, and I think it's a beautiful line, and it feels like on Earth, where we're all doing all this listening and looking, it's something that's constantly being transformed, and it feels like we're on the cusp of being able to transform it into something new, if the powers that be would let it happen, or if we are able to coordinate enough to make it happen. So I don't know, I feel like everyone here is kind of working to make the world a better place, and to sort of use sound and their art to achieve political ends that really need to be achieved. So that's basically it.
Well, I thank you for the title, because I enjoyed saying it over and over again over the past few weeks, because I wanted to be able to say it. I can't say I've committed it exactly to memory, but I did enjoy having it come out of my head. So
say it 10 times.
Not right now.
Let's all say it 10 times.
Well, I mean, I'd like to hear you say it, Raul.
I don't want to.
Do you have the title? Little by little, the funereal splendor of the ancient and icy mansion was being transformed.
There you go. You said it.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedules and your different places and joining us tonight. I do just want to say a couple of things before we go. I want to invite everyone back here next week for conversations at MOCA with national treasure Afro-Cobra artist Napoleon Jones Henderson, direct from Roxbury, Massachusetts, with Carter Jackson Brown. And we have resurrected our Jazz at MOCA program virtually, and you can tune in on your radio dial on 88.9 for Jazz at MOCA, broadcasting from WDNA Radio and on the MOCA website. And this, the last Friday of every month. And this month we'll have Gene Kay's Sextet. So check that out and check out the museum's website and follow us on all the social media channels. Keep up to date on our upcoming exhibitions and events. And thank you all so much, and keep making music and sounds, please.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much for inviting us.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Night.
Good night.